This Day Live, the Sunday talk show here on the Arise News channel. Now to our next story of the day. The Afriland Properties PLC, owner of Afriland Towers, has explained why some workers jumped from the 7-story building on Lagos Island's bustling Broad Street during last year's fire that claimed 10 lives. The tower, which houses offices of the United Bank for Africa, the Federal Inland Revenue Service, and United Capital PLC, was engulfed by smoke that trapped occupants and forced desperate staff to leave from upper floors. In a statement signed by its head of brand marketing and corporate communications, Chukwunonso Okafor, the property firm said the blaze started in the inverter room at the basement before smoke spread rapidly throughout the building, blocking escape routes. The company confirmed 10 fatalities, including staff of UCP and the FIRS. And then in that same neighborhood, the same day, there was another fire incident behind Mandela's, where a shopping plaza was also engulfed by fire. Meanwhile, a committee set up to investigate violence in Plateau State in Nigeria's Middle Belt claims that about 11,749 people were killed in violent attacks in the state between 2001 and 2025. According to the report, the recorded deaths had been a product of various forms of violence, including herders-farmers clashes, intercommunal violence, and ethno-religious crises. The violence has led to the death of thousands of people and the displacement of thousands others. The fact-finding committee on incessant attacks, killings, and destruction in Plateau said no fewer than 420 communities in the state were attacked between the periods of time in question. I'm now being joined by security expert and policy analyst, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Good to have you on the program, Dr. Adamu. Good to see you.
Same here, Dr. Abati. Unfortunately, the topic we're discussing is not a very friendly topic, sadly.
I can imagine. But very quickly, let's start with insecurity. In the course of the week, we were told there was a meeting in Katsina in some communities where, local communities were negotiating, trying to make peace with bandits, terrorists, one of the most notorious around the area, including also a gentleman called Aliero. But even while they were still having that negotiation, back in Zamfara, 55 persons were abducted as they were coming out of the mosque and taken into the mountains. So it looks like on one hand, both government and communities are trying to address the problem, negotiating perhaps, or saying they are decimating, but clearly it looks like the matter is far beyond the ability of the government. And then we have this sad report from Katsina that over 11,789 persons have been killed in the last 14 years. 420 communities have been displaced. That's in Katsina State alone, not to talk of other parts of the north. Why is this security problem so intractable? Yeah, in Plateau State. It was in Plateau that the report about 11,789 came from. Why is the problem so intractable?
In simple terms, Dr. Abati, it's because we're not holding the elements accountable. Especially, on the one hand, you have the authorities, the government, and the various security agencies that are responsible for security within the country. In the minimum, we have about 29 primary ministries, departments, and agencies that are responsible for security. Then you have an additional 13 to 14 that are supporting them in different ways. So all in all, we're looking at about 42 MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies that have responsibility for security. But I make bold to say that the primary challenge, why the reason is intractable, is that we're now holding these 42 accountable. Each of them has a mandate, and that mandate is very clear. The whole concept of national security enterprise is to deliver Section 14, subsection 2 of the Constitution. So where there is a failure, an inability to deliver that aspect of the Constitution, which is to guarantee my and your safety and the safety of every law-abiding citizen. One or the other of these 42 that I've mentioned should be held accountable. But sadly, Dr. Abati, over time, we haven't seen that happening. Repeatedly, I mean, you gave several instances of occurrences, but I'm sure if you look into your archives, you would rarely find instances where any of these 42 agencies have been held accountable to say, why did you allow such an incident to happen? If a particular non-state armed group go to a local government in Plateau, in this instance, 420 local governments, and I also make bold to say the gentleman who headed that committee, someone I respect very well, a friend, was at one time the head of Operation Safe Haven, which is the military operation that was deployed there to prevent the very attack that he documented. But it will be interesting if I have had the opportunity to ask the committee, what have they recommended in terms of those security agencies that have the responsibility to prevent this attack, but did not prevent it and allowed the attack to happen. So that's number one, Dr. Abati. The second part of accountability is from us, the citizens. These people who commit these crimes are not ghosts. They live side by side with us. In some instances, we inadvertently support them. So what has happened to the very fabric of social cohesion that has now allowed us to not only allow, but to support these non-state armed groups and their elements to exercise this level of violence?
Dr. Adamu, you were talking about accountability. And I was going to ask you, this coordination among the various responsible agencies. Now, not too long ago, we were praising the Office of the NSA, the Department of State Services, the military, for collaborating to get a gentleman called Emir Ansaru and his chief of staff, one Mahmouda, running an Al-Qaeda affiliate, terrorizing parts of the north. How do you sustain that kind of interagency collaboration so that, look, we can have that level of achievement, so that it's not just an episode?
I'm very happy with what I'm seeing at the moment. As you know, I run a firm, and part of what we do is we keep tabs of such developments. So we're actually seeing a decline in numbers, which speaks to this synergy that you've mentioned. It's one of the reasons why we're seeing that decline. But as the incidents that occurred starting from Thursday into the weekend reminded us, Banki, military formation in Banki in Borno State was taken over by the bad guys, and they kept it for more than 12 hours, which is something that should never have happened. So it's a reminder of the fact that in spite of this reduction that I've mentioned, which is commendable, and in spite of the improved synergy, there is a lot that needs to be done. Now, what do we need to do to ensure that this is not just a flash in the pan? This is a sustainable victory. Number one, Dr. Abati, we need to suffocate the bad guys. The oxygen that allows them to drive, we need to take that. Kinetic operations will never do that. Kinetic operations can help us provide the ground for us to do the important things. And the important things is, number one, stop them from recruiting new members. And this is not a kinetic operation, it's a non-kinetic operation through counter-radicalization, de-radicalization, all of those elements under our countering violent extremism framework. We must implement them to stop them from recruiting new members. Number two is to stop them from acquiring weaponry. No matter how spirited they are and dedicated to their cause, if they don't have weapons, or we deny them the ability to have weapons, even where they have the weapons and they don't have ammunition, it's a matter of time. The whole issue would die. So we need to enhance that. And their access to weapons, we've documented that. It's well known. We know where they get their weapons. So we must take steps to prevent them from doing that. Number three is their funding capabilities. The shadow economy that allows criminality to continue to thrive, and sometimes even the formal economy. Banks that don't implement their KYCs all those things that the NFIU is doing, that we've not fully implemented them, we must implement them fully so that we deny that economy that the criminals use to sustain their activities. And then, of course, the last one is the influence that they are able to exercise within the spaces where they operate. We must put in place measures to deny them that influence, including, for instance, their movement abilities. They move on motorbikes most times. So we must put in place measures to deny them the ability to move from point A to point B. It is inconceivable, Dr. Abati, that all these non-state actors will travel 20, 30, 40, 50 kilometers, in some instances 70 kilometers, to come, carry out an attack, finish the attack, and then go back to wherever it is that they came from. Meanwhile, we have surveillance equipment that we've bought for thousands of dollars, which takes me back to this absence of accountability. At what point do we call those responsible to say, why didn't you detect that movement? Even after they carried out the attack, why didn't you go after them to make sure that they don't tell the story of this very stupid thing that they did? So those are the elements that we must focus on if we're going to end this issue.
Okay, Dr. Adamu, you've quoted Section 14, Sub 2 of the 1999 Constitution, which has to do with security and welfare of the people as the primary responsibility of government. You've talked about accountability. The other subject with which I introduced this conversation, is also related to that. In Lagos, a few days ago, we had a fire incident. Within the same neighborhood, at the Afriland Tower and at a shopping plaza, short distance away, 10 people died, jumping from floors out of the window, and then some of them died in the process. Smoke in the building from the basement. People are becoming unconscious, and some of them also die in the process. Fire in another place. Fire service could not do anything. People have been lamenting and groaning. Now fire service says it will investigate. Again, how is this also about accountability in your view?
To an extent, yes, but from a different angle. It's anyone who is a safety specialist is familiar with the concept of occupational health, safety, and environment. And in the basic of requirements for risk management, you should have in the minimum a department or an individual who has responsibility for this OHSE, occupational health, safety, and environment. Now, Dr. Abati, how many buildings in Nigeria actually have this OHSE function? Now, the saddest part is the regulatory agencies that should have responsibility for this OHSE. In Nigeria, they are not domiciled in one ministry, department, or agency. They are domiciled across so many. You quoted the fire service, but it will shock you that it's actually the Ministry of Labor, I think, that has a significant element of that responsibility. Under the Factories Act 1990, which has now been transferred under our labor laws, it's the Ministry of Labor. But the several other components of this occupational health, safety, and environmental policies go to other government departments. So depending on if it's a hospital, if it's a factory that produces some chemicals, it could go to some other government department. So I think that is the beginning point, the regulatory framework for ensuring that we have good OHSE practices is almost absent in the country because of this multiplicity of regulatory bodies that implement it. If the committee that has been set up to kind of look into this is listening to this, one of the first things they should do is to actually request for the policy by the 2 buildings or 3 buildings or 4 that were affected. Do they even have a policy on OHSE in place? If they do, who was given the responsibility for compliance? If they had, there should have been fire escapes, there should have been fire wardens in place, they should have had simulations occasionally. When was the last time that a particular government department checked to see the compliance level of those buildings? So again, it starts from that, and like I said, it has a lot to do with accountability. If the regulatory bodies or agencies so dysregulated in the manner that I've just described, then it would really be surprising that some compliance checks was ever done in those buildings. And I think going forward, this is perhaps what we should start. And I must say that there are organizations in Nigeria, both private and public, that will be happy to support this. As an example, I'm a fellow of the Risk Management Society of Nigeria, a group of experts who have come together from different sectors to support risk management in Nigeria. They are cut across all the sectors of the economy, and I'm sure that's the beginning point. There are several others that will be willing to support some form of policy framework that would reduce safety issues in the manner that we're seeing them in Nigeria. It's not just fire, it's not just this type of building issues, but of course flooding is another issue. Health, pandemics are another issue. So we must have in place such a framework to address that, where periodically the regulatory bodies would check compliance by the different segments of the society. We're talking about a building now. How about our markets? How about, there are so many components to this, Dr. Abati.
Okay, on that note, I would like to thank you very much, Dr. Kabir Adamu, for joining us on today's edition of This Day Live, this Sunday talk show. Thank you very much indeed.